The following is an ICOM student media production from Brigham Young University, Idaho.
Like many other living organisms, a rose needs nourishment from the necessities of life in order to survive, namely water, sunlight, and fertilizer. As the seed from a rose accepts each of these vital components, it begins to form a rosebud. As that bud continues in proper nourishment, the petals push outward, inviting sunlight to come in, and at the same time showing off its beauty for all to see. Once in bloom, a rose is considered to be the world's most recognized symbol of both beauty and splendor. Such a simple yet beautiful process can also be used to describe the formation and growth of the church in the nation of Mexico. When we think of pioneers from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, our minds are immediately turned to visions of covered wagons, hand carts, and hard times. Or maybe we think of European converts tightly packed on a ship crossing the Atlantic. It's a trip that will take them weeks, if not months, to complete. While early pioneers of the church came from different parts of the world and many different social circumstances, if there is one constant that a person can take from hearing of the ordeal, it's this: the majority never gave up on the faith. The story of the Latter-day Saints in Mexico is one very similar to that of those in the United States, full of faith, hope, and miracles. In 1874, an announcement came from Church President Brigham Young that the nation of Mexico was to be opened for the preaching of the gospel. It was a short time later that missionaries were sent to establish the kingdom in this great land. They included Daniel Webster Jones and Henry Bresee. Their specific responsibility was to translate the Book of Mormon along with some missionary pamphlets into Spanish. Bresee and Jones eventually got some help in their task. Melitón Trejo, an immigrant from Spain, had an eager desire to have the scriptures in his own language. Together in 1875, they completed about 100 pages, which were entitled Trozos Selectos del Libro de Mormón, selected extracts from the Book of Mormon. That same year, 6 elders were called to open a mission in Mexico. They included Helaman Pratt, James Z. Stewart, Anthony W. Ivins, Robert H. Smith, Ammon M. Tenney, and Daniel Jones. Jones's son Wiley also accompanied the men on the trip. He even led the way for much of the time. They were searching for a safe haven for families who could not practice polygamy in the United States. As they reached El Paso in January of 1876, they split up, and Elders Jones and Ivins entered the Ciudad de Juarez. They were not allowed to preach, but they did give out a few of the selections of the Book of Mormon. They gained favor with many of the powerful people in the city. 3 months later, all the missionaries continued on their journey, traveling deeper into Mexico until they arrived in Chihuahua. A few weeks later, they were able to hold a church meeting with permission from government officials, but in May they traveled home. October, however, brought more missionaries to Mexico, including Brother Trejo himself. Because of much success by 1879, more missionaries were sent along with an apostle, Elder Moses Thatcher, to Mexico City. Elder Thatcher dedicated the land for the preaching of the gospel. His work proved to be beneficial for the church, as by the time he left, Elder Thatcher had baptized 61 people.
Y según la historia de la iglesia,
According to the history of the church, written by a few authors, the first who went to Mexico, searching for another place for the saints, went because Brigham Young thought that perhaps the saints would have to move again from Utah. So they gave them a visa to go to Mexico. That was one of the reasons that they went searching. Not all of the colonists in the Mormon colonies were polygamous. Many were not. But they went looking also for opportunity, land, many things.
In 1885, polygamist families traveled to Corralitos, Chihuahua, in order to escape oppression. By the time that the 350 members arrived, they were ordered to return to the United States by Mexican officials. Brigham Young Jr. and Elder Moses Thatcher went to plead for these refugees. They traveled to the capital and got the needed permission in order to stay. These initial 350 members founded what were called the Mormon colonies. They also established wards and were some of the principal founders of the church in Mexico.
Oh, how I respect those brethren. To those faithful, valiant, strong men and women who helped so greatly to establish the church in Mexico.
En establecer la iglesia en México.
Through 1895, the colonies suffered many hardships, including sickness, as well as a closed mission, and an earthquake passed through the area at the time as well. Throughout it all, though, the members grew and prospered as they built schools, cleaned cities, and by 1901 the mission was reopened. President Tenney, the new mission president at the time, worked hard to regain the trust of the fallen membership, and in doing so gained 175 new converts to the church. The year 1910 was another big blow for the colonies. They were right in the middle of a civil war. They were ordered to give up their weapons to both sides of the war, but when they refused, armies looted and scared many of the members into leaving. Their exodus back into the United States lasted until 1924. It was then that missionaries and colonists gained permission to move freely throughout Mexico. By 1926, pro-Catholic politicians made sure that only Catholic priests were allowed to preach any sort of religion. The branches in Mexico then were left to their own devices. However, they received considerable growth despite the persecution. Amelia Monroy recalls the criticism that her father received upon joining the church, defecting from Catholicism.
Pues aquí en el pueblo se enojaron mucho porque
the people here in the city were very upset when he joined the church because he didn't want to go to the Catholic church anymore. His family was very Catholic when they arrived here in the city. They were always in the church. They always played the guitar and the violin in the church services. But after they got to know the LDS church, they didn't want to go to the Catholic church anymore. So all of the people in the city were upset about it.
Without any help from the central church leadership, many members in Mexico